All right, so for my introduction to mental health discussion two, I'm just gonna get right into the questions. So after watching the documentary about fentanyl use, focusing more on the U.S., the individual story that touched me the most would be Brittany's story. And I think a lot of it had to do because of her experience with her mom and her new baby daughter. The story of her relapse after her birth of her daughter nearly had me in tears. I really loved that in this documentary. They not only got the point of view of the addict, of the person experiencing the addiction with drugs, but with Brittany's situation, they also got her mother's point of view, and just how horrified she was while her daughter was using heroin. Personally, I can't relate to Brittany on the mother side of things since I don't have kids myself. But I do have a mom who cares a great deal about my health, my well being, and I can't imagine what she would be going through if I was in a similar situation, or how, disappointed and just horrified she would be if I was going through something similar to what Brittany did and how my mom would be feeling. Brittany's situation really opened my eyes more to the family effect of addiction. It isn't just the person who is suffering from it. It also has a great deal of impacts on everybody involved, with that person who cares for them, loves them, that type of thing. So, most definitely, Brittany's story touched me the most. The cycle of addiction for this individual. So, as we know, and as I was able to research based on the PowerPoints posted for this course, addiction tends to follow a predictable cycle. So although the documentary doesn't dive into all the specific details of Britney's timeline with addiction, I'm still going to briefly go through the cycle and kind of what each step means. So addiction starts off with that first initial use, and just general experimentation of a certain substance. So the documentary doesn't describe Britney's first encounter with heroin, but we know that began to use it when she was quite young. And an assumption that could be drawn from that is that, sometimes with younger people, addictions may begin due to, peers using drugs and the peer pressure that's associated with hanging around with people who maybe use or abuse substances. So perhaps that was the case for Brittany. The next part of the cycle of addiction is continued use. So after that first encounter with a substance, there's that desire to repeat that good experience. This is where Brittany likely would have been denying any issues with addiction or utilizing heroin, claiming she wasn't doing it at all, or I just do it once in a while for fun, or whatever the case is. But in general, she's actually starting to develop a pattern of using. So maybe it's every night after dinner, it becomes her routine to get high. The next step in the cycle is tolerance. So that occurs next. So after that routine of use is beginning to occur, your body begins to get used to that substance. And Brittany may need to consume more heroin in order to reach the same level as, what she did with a small amount in her first encounter to get that same level of high. Dependence comes after tolerance. So, with consuming more heroin at a more frequent rate, Brittany's body begins to get used to the presence of heroin and functioning with that substance in her body. This would be the point where Brittany would likely feel like she couldn't make it through the day without her hit of heroin. And then psychologically, it begins to have more of an impact where like I said, she has that thought of I can't make it through the day without heroin, without getting high. Once dependency is established, addiction has now occurred. So this is where there's genuine physiological changes in the brain that have occurred, and they affect behavior and the person overall and how they act. As did a lot of personal research, I looked on the National Institute on Drug Abuse 2017. Neurotransmitters are affected as well. Most drugs have a large impact on the neurotransmitter dopamine. There's a dramatic increase of dopamine signaling in the brain, and dopamine is the neurotransmitter that allows us to feel pleasure and even euphoria when we do drugs. So naturally, we all have dopamine that is occurring in our brain. When you abuse a substance or use a certain drug, there's a large increase of that dopamine signaling in the brain, which is why there is so much pleasure and, like I said, like a sense of euphoria associated with getting high. When that goes up during substance abuse, Brittany would be feeling incredible, feeling on cloud nine. But when she isn't using that substance or high, her body's natural level of dopamine is no longer satisfactory to allow her to feel the same level of pleasure. So that's kind of what gives her a drive to want to use drugs again and again and experience the euphoria like I said, that she can't achieve otherwise. There's also what's referred to as the 4 C's of addiction. So the first C is craving, which is that craving for the substance. Next is control or loss of control. That's next as the person begins to lose control over their life, lose their ability to function without drugs, things like that. Just an overall lack of control. Compulsion is the next thing, which is the urge to do something. Um, so it could be, the act of doing things that maybe they only do when they're high. So it could be things like aggression. They have the urge to be aggressive, to cheat, to eat junk food, whatever the case is. Or it could just be the compulsion to do drugs. So the urge to want to get high all the time. Consequences is the last C, and this is just simply the consequence of using that substance. So whether it be losing family members and friends that no longer want to be part of your life if you're high, and financially struggling could be another consequence, if you're spending more money on substances and can't pay your bills, that type of thing. Withdrawal is the next cycle of addiction, or the next step in the cycle of addiction, and it's what happens when the person is without the substance. So, with Brittany in the documentary, it shares some of her experience going through rehab, and she does get clean. She would have gone through a period of withdrawal. While withdrawing, your brain and body essentially is now trying to learn to cope and function without that substance. And like I've previously mentioned, a big change that occurs when you're using substances is the effect on the neurotransmitter dopamine. When you're not using drugs, like I said, not having that influx of dopamine signaling can cause a lot of negative signs and symptoms because your body is used to having so much of that going on and feeling euphoric. So often people who are withdrawing have increased level of fear, anxiety, stress. They can become more easily agitated. And physically, they can even experience symptoms like nausea, vomiting, pain, and even insomnia. So not only are there kind of psychological factors, there are also physical implications that come along as well, with withdrawing from drugs. And those negative implications also make it hard for someone who is withdrawing to stay clean because they know that using would eliminate a lot of those negative things that they're experiencing. Although over time, once your body has the time to withdraw, they do go away. It's just hard to think that long term, and the urge to use increases because it's so easy to disregard the consequences of using drugs and with what comes with addiction when you could just make yourself feel better immediately. So relapse is the last phase of the cycle, and this is when they begin to use again. We know that Brittany relapsed after having her baby. She claimed she was mentally not in a good place, had just fought with her mom, ended up getting high because she didn't feel good enough to be a mom, good enough to be a daughter, and just overall felt less than, and knew that heroin would give her the pleasure and comfort she knew so well. So at this point, the cycle restarts, and they are back to square one. So Brittany went through the cycle again, and she is now clean and around to raise her daughter. The next question that have here is the costs of addiction. So, first of all, addiction nearly cost Brittany her life had her mother not found her in the bathroom floor when she relapsed and made her come to. She easily could have died, and her daughter would have lost her mom. Addiction has also cost Brittany a great deal in her relationship with her mother. Rightfully so, her mother was angry and disappointed when, after Brittany had her daughter, she made the decision to buy and use drugs while her daughter was in the next room. And addiction has definitely added an extra stressor on their relationship. Her mother stated that the saddest thing she would ever imagine having to do in her entire life would be to tell Brittany's daughter that her mom is an addict and that she wouldn't be able to stop doing drugs before they killed her. Luckily enough, Brittany is now clean, but it doesn't erase all the trauma that her and her mom have encountered together while battling that addiction. Addiction has also most definitely financially cost Brittany. Drugs are definitely not cheap, and although it doesn't state that in her situation, she does mention, like I said, that she relapsed. She was out to buy formula for her daughter, which is also not cheap. And whether this was the case for Brittany or not, I don't doubt that for some people they're forced to make the decision between buying food or formula for their baby or their next hit. And no doubt is an astronomical added expense, and especially for a single mom would be hard to balance. Brittany's mom stated that heroin or drugs in general steal dreams, is what she said. They steal futures. And even though Brittany's now clean, like I've mentioned, it doesn't get her back the years that she spent using drugs, just trying to get through the day and not achieving her goals. So it's also cost her all that time that I don't want to use the term that she's wasted, but all that time that she spent using drugs when she could have been working toward, like I said, her dreams and the future that she envisions for herself. So, some contributing factors that make it so Brittany cannot break free from the addictive lifestyle and why is relapse likely. So, Brittany went to rehab. She was ready to get clean, and she did. It seems right around shortly after the time she got pregnant and stayed clean during pregnancy and for a month afterwards. But relapse did occur for her after she gave birth, as previously mentioned, because of stress, poor mental health. This was 1 month after giving birth to her baby, and we already know the postpartum period can cause depression and other negative mental health implications due to the great change in hormones, plus her prior experience with substances and addiction. Her and her mother got in a fight. She was already not so in a great mental standpoint, and she left to run an errand, ran into an old dealer at a gas station, emotionally charged, and decided to buy a bag of drugs for him. She went home, they had dinner, and then something just came over her to influence her to do all the drugs, which she did. She admits in the interview that she was in disbelief of how she did that or what led her to doing the drugs with her mother and daughter in the next room, but that's what occurred. At the time of her relapse, Brittany states as well that she wasn't concerned for others. She was just confident that her daughter would be better off being raised by her mom and that she wasn't good enough overall to be a mother, to be alive, be around anymore. And she was just overall in a really bad mental health state. Stress is definitely a factor that caused her relapse once, and it may be a trigger for the future. Arguments or rifts with loved ones can be very stressful, and without proper coping mechanisms in place, it can be very easy to turn to substances as a way to temporarily disguise and minimize the distress that it caused. As her daughter ages, if finances are tight, that could be an added stressor as well. Turning to substances while stressed about money is definitely counterintuitive since drugs cost a lot and only make finances tighter. Many people, however, do turn to drugs as a way to emotionally cope with that stress rather than looking at the long term consequences of spending that money in that way. So that could be a factor in the future that may influence Brittany to turn to substances again. However, in Brittany's case, I most definitely believe she has the ability to stay clean. She has her daughter to be clean for, who she wants to see grow up, has her mother in her corner supporting her every step of the way. She wants others to be proud of her, and she wants to be proud of herself. So the fact that also she has that step of, I want to do this for me, I really hope that because of those things going on in her life, she's able to pull away from addictive substances and stay clean. So what would be my role in caring for this individual? So most definitely support would be first and foremost. Recovering from addiction is not a linear process. There are a lot of ups and downs, relapses, struggles, but constant support from my client would be a necessity. Next up would be education. So, educate them on the effects of long term drug use. Also, educate them on perhaps different resources that are in place. I would also work to incorporate their family in their recovery if there is family that wants to be involved and teach them ways that they can support their loved one as well. Almost most importantly, is setting them up for success by exposing them and telling them about different rehabilitation programs, support groups, and even to for clients who are not yet ready to get clean, perhaps educating them about like safe needle exchange programs or the way that they can keep themselves safe while using, I think is another important thing because I mean, until you're ready to quit and until you're ready to move past that point in your life, you can't force somebody. So if resources of rehabilitation are things they're not yet ready for, like I said, if nothing else, just teach them about ways that they can use and do what they need to do, but stay safe and decrease their risk of maybe overdosing, decrease the risk of getting HIV or other infectious illnesses from using dirty needles and things like that. And I know in Fredericton alone, we do have a needle exchange program. So, like I said, just if they're not ready to yet get clean and go to rehab and that type of thing, I would definitely look into setting them up with ways that they can continue using if that's what they feel they need to do, but they can do it in a safe way. All right, so that concludes my second discussion for Intro to Mental Health. I'm referring to Brittany's case. Thanks.